He had it all: prestige, wealth, and a growing family, but he felt empty. He fell in love with another woman and walked away from everything, never foreseeing the price of his decision. The love that was born from chaos, demanded courage, came at a high cost, but changed his life forever. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. New York City was waking up under a thin haze that fogged the windows of the skyscrapers lining Park Avenue. The day promised to be hot, but it was still 6 in the morning, and the city was breathing in that momentary calm before urban chaos took over every corner, every packed subway car, every impatient honk. Ryan Anderson watched it all from his office on the 42nd floor of one of the most imposing buildings in the area. He was 43 years old, with hair just starting to grey at the temples, broad shoulders that still held the weight of an impeccable Italian suit, and a gaze that shifted between the determination of a man who had built an empire and the weariness of one who was beginning to question its cost. Anderson Holdings was more than a company. It was a legacy. Ryan had taken control at 30 after his father suffered a heart attack and decided to retire to the countryside. Since then, he had multiplied their revenue 6-fold, opened branches in 3 states, forged international partnerships, and become a benchmark in the infrastructure and civil construction market. His name was synonymous with success. His face graced the covers of business magazines. His opinion was sought in interviews, on panels, at dinners with politicians and entrepreneurs. Ryan Anderson was, in everyone's eyes, a man who had everything. And maybe that was why lately he felt like he had nothing. It wasn't something he could easily explain. It wasn't unhappiness in the common sense of the word. It wasn't depression, anxiety, or any medical diagnosis that stressed-out New York executives tended to collect like corporate war trophies. It was something more subtle, more profound. It was a feeling of emptiness that caught him by surprise in the most unexpected moments, during a crucial meeting when everyone was waiting for his final decision. In the middle of a gala dinner, surrounded by smiles and champagne glasses, or in the morning when he woke up next to his wife and felt like he was playing a role, performing his own life instead of living it. Julia was still asleep when he left the house that morning. She was 6 months pregnant and had been waking up later and later, her body demanding extra rest, her legs swollen, her sleep heavy. Ryan had left a note on the fridge, as he always did. Kisses. Call me if you need anything. The same phrase every day, automatic, devoid of real emotion. Julia was beautiful. Julia was kind. Julia was the perfect wife. Everyone said so. The press treated them like New York's golden couple. She, the daughter of a traditional New York family, with a degree in architecture, but dedicated to her home and discreet social projects. He, the visionary entrepreneur who had built everything from scratch or close to it. Together for 12 years, married for 8, finally expecting their first child. The narrative was flawless. But Ryan knew that flawless narratives often hid invisible cracks. He couldn't remember the last time he had truly talked to Julia. Really talked, not just exchanged practical information about appointments, home renovations, medical exams, or details of the baby shower she was organizing. When was the last time he had looked at her and felt that flutter in his stomach, that urgent desire to be close, to touch, to share something beyond the domestic routine? Ryan didn't know, and that scared him, because it meant that somewhere along the way he had stopped feeling, or worse, he had never truly felt it, and had only convinced himself that it was love because it was what was expected of him. His phone vibrated on the desk, an email notification. Ryan picked it up and read it quickly. It was from his assistant, reminding him of the trip to Chicago the next day, a meeting with investors from Illinois interested in a new port infrastructure project, 2 days of intense negotiations, a 5-star hotel downtown. Everything organized, everything planned, everything under control. Ryan sighed. Another trip. More days away from home, more nights in impersonal hotel rooms, ordering room service and watching news channels while pretending to work on his laptop. He should have felt guilty for the sense of relief that always washed over him before these trips. He should have missed Julia, worried about the pregnancy, felt anxious about being away. But the raw truth was that he felt free, temporarily free from the weight of pretending, of performing, of being the ideal husband and exemplary father-to-be. Free to be just Ryan, without the expectations, without the gazes, without the silent pressure to live up to an image he himself had helped create. The morning progressed through back-to-back meetings. Ryan commanded everything with his usual precision, made quick decisions, solved complex problems with apparent ease, and kept his team motivated and focused. When the clock struck noon, he finally had a break. He went down to the Japanese restaurant on the ground floor of the building, a discreet place frequented by executives who valued privacy and speed. He ate alone, as always, checking emails on his phone between bites of sashimi. It was during dessert that she walked in. Ryan looked up by chance only because he heard a loud, uninhibited laugh cut through the polite silence of the room. And then he saw her. A woman who must have been in her early 30s, maybe younger, with dark hair pulled into a slightly messy bun, thin-framed glasses, and a navy blue suit that balanced professionalism and elegance effortlessly. She was talking animatedly with two men in suits, gesturing with her hands, smiling with a naturalness that seemed out of place in that environment of restrained formalities. Ryan realized he was staring and quickly looked away, back at his phone, but he kept listening to her voice. It was a confident, firm voice, with that distinct New York accent that gave away someone born and raised in the city. She was talking about investments, risk management, opportunities in emerging markets. She spoke with authority, without hesitation, without the apologetic tone many women still adopted in male-dominated corporate settings. Ryan found himself curious. Who was she? Where did she work? Why had he never seen her before? As she passed his table on her way out, their eyes met for a second. Just 1 second. But it was enough for Ryan to feel something he hadn't felt in years. A jolt, an awakening, a pang in his stomach that had nothing to do with the sashimi he had just eaten. She smiled slightly, a polite, impersonal smile of someone who recognizes a familiar face but isn't sure from where, and kept walking. Ryan stood still for a few moments, processing what had just happened. It was ridiculous. It was absurd. He was a married man, expecting a child, respected by New York society, and there he was, in the middle of a Japanese restaurant, with his heart racing because of a stranger's glance. He shook his head, asked for the check, and went back to his office. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. In the following days, Ryan found himself looking for her in the building's lobby, in the elevator, in the hallways. He felt ridiculous, like an obsessed teenager, but he couldn't control it. Who was that woman? He found out almost by accident when he casually mentioned to his assistant that he had seen an unfamiliar executive at the Japanese restaurant. The assistant, always well informed about every move in the building, answered without hesitation, Isabella Martinez, a director at a financial consulting firm that had just leased an office on the 30th floor. Young, brilliant, had already done important work for mid-sized companies and was now expanding to larger clients. Originally from Princeton, a graduate of Princeton University with a postgraduate degree from abroad, no known husband or children. A meteoric career built on pure talent and tireless work. Ryan memorized every detail as if he were studying a business report. Isabella Martinez. The name echoed in his head during meetings, during the drive home, during the silent dinners with Julia. He tried to focus on conversations about the baby's nursery, about the colors for the room being renovated, about the names Julia suggested with enthusiasm. But his mind was elsewhere. It was on the 30th floor. It was on that fleeting smile. It was on the possibility of a conversation, a connection, something he couldn't define. But that pulled him like an invisible magnet. The trip to Chicago arrived. Ryan boarded the morning flight, his head still confused, his heart torn between guilt and curiosity. The meetings were productive. The investors loved the proposal. Everything indicated the deal would be closed in a matter of weeks. Ryan should have been euphoric, but he was just mechanically satisfied, playing a role, executing a familiar script. On the way back to New York, he ran into Isabella in the airport terminal. It was one of those coincidences that seem like movie scenes but happen in real life more. often than you'd think. She was in the next line, waiting to check her bag. Ryan recognized her immediately, felt his heart pound, and hesitated for a second before approaching. When he finally gathered the courage and said a simple, "Hi," he realized she had recognized him too. Her smile was different this time, less impersonal, more genuine. "Hi, Ryan Anderson, right? We saw each other at the Japanese restaurant in the building." Her voice had that direct, no-nonsense tone. Ryan confirmed. "Isabella Martinez. I've heard about your consulting firm. You're doing some interesting work." She thanked him naturally, without false modesty, but also without arrogance. And just like that, without planning, without any prior intention, they started talking. The conversation flowed with a disconcerting ease. They talked about business, about the challenges of entrepreneurship in New York, about the peculiarities of the American market. Ryan discovered that Isabella had strong opinions, solid arguments, a worldview that challenged some of his own certainties. She didn't just agree with him out of politeness. She questioned, she debated, she smiled when he made a valid point and retorted when she disagreed. It was stimulating, it was alive, it was the exact opposite of the formal scripted conversations he had every day. They boarded the same flight. They sat in separate seats, but Ryan couldn't concentrate on anything during the 2-hour trip. He could only think about how to resume that conversation. When they landed at LaGuardia, he made an impulsive decision. He approached her at baggage claim and asked if she'd like to grab coffee sometime. Just to continue the business conversation, of course. Networking. She looked at him for a few seconds, assessing, and then smiled. "Sure, give me your number." Ryan left the airport with her number saved in his phone and a feeling of teenage euphoria mixed with responsible adult guilt. When he got home, Julia was asleep on the living room couch, her large belly covered by a light blanket, her face serene. Ryan stopped and watched her for a long minute. She was beautiful, she was good. She didn't deserve what he was feeling, what he was thinking, what he knew he was about to do. But the guilt wasn't strong enough to stop him. The coffees turned into lunches. The lunches turned into dinners. The dinners turned into conversations that stretched late into the night, sitting in some discreet bar in the West Village, discussing philosophy, politics, art, everything but the obvious thing hanging in the air between them. Isabella was everything Ryan didn't find at home. She challenged him, she provoked him, she made him question his own convictions. And above all, she made him feel anger, euphoria, frustration, desire. Feel that he was alive, that he had a body, that he had a soul, that he was more than a successful executive with a perfectly organized life. Ryan knew he was playing with fire. He knew that every meeting was another step toward a cliff, but he couldn't stop. It was as if he had woken up from a deep sleep and now couldn't go back to sleep. Julia started to notice he was different, more distant, more irritable, more absent even when he was present. She tried to talk to him a few times, but Ryan would deflect, blaming stress at work, pressure from the shareholders, worry about the new project. Julia believed him, or pretended to believe him, or simply didn't want to face the truth that was beginning to take shape in the subtext of their marriage. It was on a Friday night, 3 months after that first meeting at the airport, that Ryan and Isabella finally crossed the line that separated intense friendship from an extramarital affair. It happened at her apartment, a modern loft in Soho, after another one of those conversations that seemed to have no end. Ryan should have left hours ago. He should have made an excuse, gone home to his pregnant wife, to the life he had so carefully built. But when Isabella looked at him that way, when she touched his face with her hand and asked softly why he was fighting so hard, against something so obvious, Ryan simply gave up the fight. The kiss was inevitable, and so was everything that followed. Ryan returned home in the early hours of the morning, his clothes wrinkled, his heart confused, his mind oscillating between the ecstasy and the horror of what he had just done. Julia was awake, sitting up in bed, her hands on her belly, her eyes red. She didn't need to ask. She just looked at him and said a single sentence. "You're not here with me anymore, are you, Ryan?" He didn't answer. He had no answer. Or rather, he did, but he couldn't say it out loud yet. He couldn't admit that he had fallen in love with someone else, that he wanted another life, that their marriage was just a beautiful facade he could no longer bear to maintain. The following months were a hell of silences and lies. Ryan continued to see Isabella whenever he could. The affair ceased to be merely physical and transformed into something deeper, more complex, more real than anything he had ever experienced. Isabella wasn't just an adventure, she was a choice, a conscious, selfish, devastating choice, but one that Ryan felt he had to make to keep breathing. Julia entered her 9th month of pregnancy. Her belly was huge. She moved with difficulty around the house, preparing everything for the baby's arrival, organizing the nursery with the meticulous care of someone about to meet the greatest love of her life. Ryan watched her from a distance, feeling a toxic mix of love, guilt, pity, and resentment. Love for what they once were, guilt for what he was doing, pity for what she didn't know yet, and resentment for feeling trapped in a life he hadn't really chosen, but had merely accepted as inevitable. It was on a Tuesday night that Ryan finally gathered the courage to tell the truth. Julia was on the couch, watching some random TV show, stroking her belly distractedly. Ryan sat down next to her and remained silent for a few minutes, trying to find the right words. But there were no right words for what he had to say, so he just said it. "Julia, we need to talk." She turned off the TV and turned to him, already knowing from his tone of voice that something terrible was about to happen. Ryan took a deep breath. "I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time. And I've met someone who makes me feel alive again. I want a divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Julia didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just sat there, motionless, her hands on her belly, her eyes fixed on his face. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "Is it her?" Her voice was low, trembling, but still dignified. Ryan couldn't lie. "Yes, it's her." Julia closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the impact of the words. When she opened them again, there was a deep sadness in her gaze, but also a resigned acceptance. "Are you sure about this, Ryan? Are you sure this is what you want?" He nodded. Julia took a deep breath. "Okay then. I'll sign whatever is necessary, but don't ask me to forgive you because I can't." They scheduled the signing of the divorce papers for 2 weeks later, enough time for the lawyers to prepare everything, to decide on custody of the baby, the division of assets, all the practical details that needed to be resolved. When an 8-year marriage came to an end, Julia continued to live in the house. Ryan temporarily moved into a hotel. Isabella tried to be understanding, but Ryan could sense her anxiety, the insecurity of someone who knows she is the cause of a family tragedy and isn't sure if the story will have a happy ending for her either. The news of the divorce hadn't leaked publicly yet. They had managed to keep everything under wraps, at least for now. But Ryan knew it was only a matter of time. Soon, the press would find out. Friends would start talking. New York society, which had celebrated them as the perfect couple, would begin to speculate, to judge, to take sides. And he knew what the verdict would be. He would be the villain, the man who abandoned his pregnant wife, the selfish jerk who destroyed a family for a whim, a desire, an inconvenient passion. Ryan tried not to think about it. He tried to focus on the present, on the future he was building with Isabella, on the possibility of finally being truly happy. But guilt was a constant shadow that followed him wherever he went. It was there when he woke up in the middle of the night with a tight chest. It was there when he saw a pregnant woman on the street and thought of Julia. It was there every time Isabella asked if he was okay, and he lied, saying he was. The day to sign the papers finally arrived. Ryan woke up early that morning, a knot in his stomach, his hands sweating. He showered, put on a dark suit, and drank 3 cups of coffee, trying to chase away the anxiety. Isabella called to wish him strength. Her voice sounded worried, but also hopeful. "After today will be free to really start." Ryan mumbled a thanks and hung up. He arrived at the lawyer's office 15 minutes early. Julia hadn't arrived yet. Ryan waited in the reception area, flipping through magazines without paying attention, checking his phone every 2 minutes. His lawyer was talking quietly with hers, finalizing the last details. All very civilized, all very adult, all very wrong. Julia walked in exactly on time. Ryan stood up automatically when he saw her. She was pale, her swollen eyes betraying a sleepless night, but still beautiful, still dignified in a light blue dress that accentuated her almost 9-month belly. They greeted each other with a nod, without words. What was there to say? They sat down in the conference room. The papers were placed on the table. Julia's lawyer explained each clause, each item, each decision that had been made on their behalf. Shared custody, child support, division of assets. All very fair, all very cold. Ryan barely listened. He just wanted it to be over. It was when the lawyer asked Julia to sign the first document that she let out a low groan and clutched her belly. Ryan looked at her immediately, alarmed. Julia was pale, sweating, her breathing rapid. "Are you okay?" he asked. She shook her head, trying to compose herself. "It's just a contraction. They've been happening since yesterday. Nothing serious." But the groan repeated, stronger this time, and Julia doubled over, her face contorted in pain. The lawyer stood up immediately. "You need to go to the hospital. Now." Julia's lawyer was already calling for an ambulance. Ryan was paralyzed for a few seconds, processing what was happening. She was going into labor, right there, right then, on the day they were about to sign their divorce. The ambulance arrived in minutes. Ryan walked Julia to the door, held her arm as the paramedics helped her onto the stretcher. She looked at him, her eyes welling up, and said only one thing: "You don't have to come." But Ryan was already climbing into the ambulance. The ride to the hospital was quick, but felt like an eternity. Ryan held Julia's hand as she breathed heavily, following the paramedics' instructions to manage the contractions. He didn't know what to say. "Sorry" seemed ridiculous. "It's going to be okay" sounded false, so he just held her hand and remained silent, feeling the grip of her fingers against his with each new wave of pain. When they arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital, Julia was immediately taken to the delivery ward. The doctors did a quick assessment and confirmed it. The baby was coming. He was premature, about 3 weeks early, but apparently in a good position, and his vital signs were stable. Julia would be taken to the operating room for an emergency C-section. Ryan could join if he wanted. He wanted to. He put on the surgical gown, the mask, and entered the cold, sterile room where his wife was about to give birth to his son. The son he was abandoning. The son who would grow up knowing his father chose another woman instead of staying by his mother's side during the pregnancy. Ryan felt his throat tighten, but he couldn't break down now. Not there. Not in front of Julia. The delivery was fast. Less than half an hour later, Ryan heard his son's first cry. A strong, healthy cry, rebelling against the world that was receiving him. The doctor held the baby up for them to see. A boy. Perfect. Small, but perfect. Julia was crying, reaching out her arms, wanting to hold her son. Ryan was crying too, but his tears were of guilt, not pure joy like hers. When they finally placed the baby in Julia's arms, she looked at him with a tenderness that broke Ryan's heart into 1,000 pieces. She whispered something to her son, low words that Ryan couldn't hear. Then she turned to him. "Do you want to hold him?" Ryan nodded, unable to speak. Julia handed him the baby carefully. Ryan felt the minimal weight of that tiny human being against his chest. He felt the warmth, he felt the breath, and he felt a pain so deep he could barely stay on his feet. This was his son. This was his family. And he was destroying it all for what? For a passion? For an intellectual connection? For wanting to feel alive? Was it worth it? Ryan didn't know anymore. At that moment, holding his newborn son while his wife watched him from the surgical table, he wasn't sure of anything. They spent 2 hours in the recovery room. The baby was examined, weighed, measured. Everything indicated that despite being premature, he was healthy and wouldn't need the NICU. Good news. Amidst the chaos, Julia rested, exhausted but relieved. Ryan sat in a chair next to the bed, watching his son sleep in the transparent bassinet beside them. His phone was vibrating in his pocket. Messages from Isabella. He ignored them all. It was when Julia finally broke the silence that Ryan knew there was no going back. She looked at him with those tired eyes, still swollen from tears, and said in a firm voice despite the fragility of the moment, "Ryan, I know you're here because you feel obligated. I know your heart is somewhere else, with someone else. And I'm not going to hold you back. I'm not going to use our son as an excuse to keep you trapped in a marriage you no longer want." Ryan tried to interrupt, but she raised her hand, asking for silence. "Let me finish. Please." Julia took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I loved you. I truly loved you. I believed we would grow old together, raise our son together, be happy together. But I'm not going to beg for love. I'm not going to plead for you to stay. If you want to go, then go. Sign the papers. Be with her, be happy. But don't ask me to pretend everything is okay. Don't ask me to forgive you, because forgiving would mean accepting that all of this was normal, understandable, justifiable. And it wasn't. You cheated on me. You abandoned me while I was pregnant. You destroyed everything we built. And as much as I still feel something for you, I can't, and I don't want to forgive you for this." Julia's words echoed in the room like the final sentences of a trial. Ryan wanted to defend himself, to explain, to make her understand that it wasn't out of malice, that it was out of desperation, suffocation, feeling like he was slowly dying inside that seemingly perfect but empty life. But he knew none of that mattered. He knew there was no explanation that could ease the pain he had caused. So he just said the only thing he could. "I'm sorry, Julia, I'm so sorry, I really am." She turned her face away, refusing to look at him. "Go, Ryan. Please, just go." He hesitated for a few seconds, looked one more time at his son sleeping peacefully in the bassinet, and then left the room. In the hospital corridor, Ryan leaned against the wall and finally allowed himself to break down. He cried silently, his hands covering his face, his body shaking with the intensity of repressed emotions. A nurse walked by and asked if he was okay. Ryan just nodded, wiped his tears and headed for the exit. He called Isabella from the parking garage. Her voice was anxious, worried. "Ryan, what happened? Where are you? Is everything okay?" He took a deep breath before answering. Julia had the baby, a boy. "They're both okay." Isabella was silent for a moment. "And the papers, did you manage to sign them?" Ryan rested his head on the steering wheel. "No, but she agreed to sign as soon as she recovers. It's over, Isabella. It's officially over." He should have felt relief. He should have felt that a difficult stage was over, and now he could finally live the life he wanted. But all Ryan felt was a vast emptiness, crushing guilt, and the certainty that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was just the inevitable consequence of choices he had made. Long ago, when he decided to live on autopilot instead of confronting his own dissatisfaction, he drove to Isabella's apartment. She was waiting at the door, hugged him as soon as she saw him, and murmured words of comfort that he barely heard. Ryan let himself be led to the couch, accepted the glass of whiskey she offered, and drank it in one gulp. Isabella sat next to him, took his hand. "We're going to be okay. You, me, us. It's going to work out. You'll see." Ryan wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her, because if he didn't, he would have destroyed his family for nothing. They spent the rest of the night in silence, holding each other on the couch, the TV on without either of them paying attention. Ryan thought about his son. He thought about Julia alone in the hospital. He thought about what he would say to his parents, his friends, his employees when the news finally broke. Because it would break. It was impossible to keep something like this a secret in a city like New York, where everyone knew everyone, where social circles intertwined and professional gossips were always on the lookout for a juicy scandal. 3 days later, Julia was discharged from the hospital. Ryan went to pick her up against her wishes, but at the request of her doctor, who thought it best for her to have someone help with the baby for the first week. The ride home was silent and awkward. The baby slept in his car seat in the back. Julia stared out the window, avoiding any eye contact with Ryan. When they arrived, he helped her inside, carried the bags, and organized the baby's things. Julia thanked him coldly and asked him to leave. Before leaving, Ryan stopped at the door of his son's room, the room that had been decorated with so much care, with the colors Julia had chosen, with the furniture they had bought together on a Saturday afternoon that now seemed to have happened in another lifetime. The baby slept in his crib, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding around him. Ryan stood there for a few minutes, just watching. Then he whispered a promise he didn't know if he could keep. "I'm going to be a good father to you. Somehow I will be." He left the house knowing he probably wouldn't live there again. He left knowing he had just closed one door and opened another. He left knowing that from that moment on, his life would never be the same, and he wasn't sure if that was a good or a bad thing. He just knew it was inevitable. In the car on the way to Isabella's apartment, Ryan allowed himself to think for the first time about what would come next. The divorce papers would be signed as soon as Julia felt ready, probably in a week or two. After that, he would be officially free. Free to publicly acknowledge his relationship with Isabella, free to build a new life, free to try to be truly happy. But freedom, Ryan was discovering, always came with a price, and he didn't yet know if he was willing or able to pay it. 2 weeks passed like a dense, suffocating fog. Ryan divided his time between work, Isabella's apartment, and brief visits to the house where Julia was caring for the baby alone. The visits were tense, formal, filled with a silence that said more than 1,000 words. He would arrive, hold his son for half an hour, exchange a few polite sentences about the baby's routine, leave an envelope of cash that Julia accepted without looking him in the eye, and then leave. Neither of them mentioned the divorce. It was as if they were avoiding the word, as if not talking about it could postpone the inevitable. But the inevitable arrived on a Thursday morning, when Julia's lawyer called to schedule the final signing of the papers. The law office, 10 in the morning. Friday. No more delays. Julia had decided she was ready. Ryan confirmed his attendance with a choked voice and hung up the phone, with trembling hands. Isabella noticed his tension immediately. They were having breakfast at her apartment, the New York morning light streaming through the panoramic windows that overlooked Midtown Manhattan. She poured more coffee into his cup, touched his arm gently. "Tomorrow's the day, isn't it?" Ryan nodded. Isabella took a deep breath. "We'll get through this. I know it's not easy. I know you're hurting. But after tomorrow, we can finally start living without hiding, without guilt, without fear." Ryan wanted to believe her, but he had a bad feeling in his stomach, a premonition he couldn't name. Friday dawned, gray. Heavy clouds covered New York, promising rain at any moment. Ryan put on a dark gray suit, shaved carefully, and tried to control the anxiety that had been consuming him since he woke up at 5 in the morning. Isabella walked him to the door, kissed him for a long time, and whispered words of encouragement that he barely registered. On the way to the law office, stuck in the city's endless traffic, Ryan thought about everything he had lost and everything he hoped to gain. He wasn't sure if the math added up. He arrived at the office, 5 minutes late. Julia was already there, sitting in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine without paying attention. She wore a simple black dress, her hair in a bun, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though she was indoors. Ryan understood. She didn't want anyone to see if she cried. They greeted each other with a nod. The lawyers guided them to the conference room. The signing was quick and mechanical. Ryan signed where his lawyer indicated, vaguely heard the explanations about each document, and confirmed with monosyllables that he understood and agreed with everything. Julia did the same. They didn't look at each other once during the entire process. When the lawyer finally declared that the divorce was official, a heavy silence fell over the room. That was it. 8 years of marriage ended with a signature. 2 lives that had been completely intertwined were now separated with the bureaucratic coldness of a terminated contract. Ryan expected to feel relief. He expected to feel a weight lifted from his shoulders. But all he felt was a vast emptiness. Julia stood up first, picked up her purse and thanked her lawyer. Before leaving, she turned to Ryan for the first time that morning. The sunglasses still covered her eyes, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her lips trembled slightly. "Take good care of our son. That's all I ask." And with that, she left. Ryan stood in the conference room for a few minutes after everyone else had gone. The senior partner watched him with an expression that mixed professionalism and compassion. "Did you get divorced because you were unhappy, or because you found another happiness?" The question caught Ryan off guard. He looked at the older man, not knowing what to say. The partner gave a sad smile. "Forgive the indiscretion. It's just that after 40 years of doing this, you learn to recognize the types of divorces. Yours is the kind you'll carry with you forever, no matter what happens next." Ryan swallowed hard and left without answering. He called Isabella from the car. "It's done." His voice came out hoarse, tired. Isabella let out a sigh of relief on the other end of the line. "Thank God, Ryan. Finally. Come over. We need to talk about the next step." He hung up and drove to her apartment on autopilot, his mind still stuck in that conference room, in that moment when Julia walked out without looking back. Isabella greeted him with champagne. She had prepared a special lunch, put on soft music, and turned the apartment into a discreet but significant celebration. Ryan tried to get into the mood, but he couldn't. He drank the champagne mechanically, ate without tasting, and answered her questions with monosyllables. Isabella realized something was wrong, but decided not to push it. She gave him space, let him recover in his own time. It was late in the afternoon when all hell broke loose. Ryan was on the couch, half asleep, when his phone started vibrating insistently. Texts, dozens of them, hundreds, all from unknown numbers. He picked up the device with his heart racing, sensing the worst. He opened the first message and felt his stomach churn. Disgusting. How could you abandon your wife on the day she gave birth? The second was worse. "You're nothing but a cheating scumbag. I hope you and your mistress burn in hell." The third included insults Ryan had never imagined would be directed at him, and the messages wouldn't stop coming. Isabella saw his expression and rushed to the couch. "What is it? What's happening?" Ryan handed her the phone, unable to speak. Isabella read a few messages, her face growing paler with each second. Oh my God, Ryan. How did they find out?" Ryan shook his head, still in shock. I don't know. But the answer came seconds later, when a notification from a news portal popped up on the screen. Billionaire CEO divorces wife on the day of their son's birth for an extramarital affair. The headline was accompanied by a photo of him leaving the law office that morning and another of Julia entering the hospital 2 weeks ago. The story had leaked, and it had leaked in the worst possible way. Ryan and Isabella were paralyzed for a few seconds, processing the magnitude of what was happening. Then his phone rang. It was the head of PR for Anderson Holdings. His voice panicked. "Ryan, we need to talk now. This is blowing up on social media. The shareholders are calling. The press is at the company's entrance. We need a statement, urgently." Ryan tried to think, but his mind was blank. "Don't say anything. Don't do anything. I'll call you back." And he hung up. Isabella was already on her computer, checking social media. Her expression was one of pure horror. "Ryan, you need to see this." He approached and felt his legs go weak. The news had gone viral. In a matter of hours, it was on every portal, on every social network, being shared thousands of times. The comments were an avalanche of hate against him, and especially against Isabella. Homewrecker, ambitious slut, shameless gold digger who destroyed a family. The insults grew more violent, more personal, more cruel. Someone had found Isabella's professional profile, her full name, old photos, information about her company. Everything was being exposed, dissected, used as ammunition against her. In a matter of hours, Isabella Martinez went from being a respected businesswoman to the most hated villain in New York. Isabella cried silently, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the computer screen. Ryan tried to comfort her, but he didn't know what to say. There is no comfort for something like this. There are no words to ease the pain of seeing your reputation destroyed publicly, of being judged and condemned by millions of people who know nothing about your story, your feelings, your reasons. Isabella's phone started ringing too. Clients cancelling contracts, business partners distancing themselves. An interview she had scheduled with a business magazine was cancelled without explanation. Another company that had shown interest in her consulting services sent a formal email ending the negotiations. The career she had built with so much work, so much dedication, so much sacrifice, was crumbling before her eyes. Night fell on New York and the scandal only grew. Journalists camped outside Isabella's building. Ryan couldn't leave without being surrounded by cameras and microphones. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, friends wanting explanations, acquaintances offering unsolicited advice, reporters asking for interviews and messages, thousands of hate messages that kept pouring in. They spent the night holding each other on the couch in silence, watching the world collapse around them. Ryan tried to call Julia, to apologize for the media circus, to ask if she and the baby were okay. She didn't answer. She sent a short, direct text. "Don't call me. Don't look for me. Leave us alone." Ryan put his phone away with a lump in his throat. The weekend was a nightmare. The news kept coming, articles about Ryan's history, interviews with people who claimed to know Isabella and talked about how she had always been ambitious and calculating, opinion pieces debating the morality of extramarital affairs, society columnists speculating about when the affair had started, if she was pregnant too, if there was a financial motive, all based on speculation, gossip, and pure malice. But the truth didn't matter. What mattered was the narrative that had been built, and that narrative was relentless. Isabella stopped eating. She spent hours on the computer reading every comment, every news story, every opinion about her. Ryan tried to pull her away, but she seemed hypnotized by her own destruction. "It's like I don't exist anymore, like they've erased who I am and replaced me with a distorted, monstrous version that has nothing to do with me. And the worst part is, there's no point in explaining. No one wants to listen. They've already decided who I am." Her voice came out flat, emotionless, defeated. On Monday, when Ryan finally went to the office, he discovered the nightmare was far from over. The receptionist greeted him coldly. Employees averted their eyes as he walked down the hallways. In the boardroom, he found the board of directors waiting for him. 8 men and 2 women, all with grave expressions, sitting around the table like a tribunal. The chairman of the board, Gerald Thompson, a man in his 60s who had been a friend of Ryan's father, got straight to the point. "Ryan, we need to discuss the situation. The company is suffering, shareholders are worried, clients are questioning if they want to remain associated with our brand. The image of Anderson Holdings is being tarnished because of your personal life." Ryan tried to defend himself. "My personal life shouldn't affect the company. The company is strong. The numbers are solid." Gerald shook his head. "You know it doesn't work that way. Image is everything. And right now, your image is that of a man who abandoned his pregnant wife. That affects all of us." Ryan looked around the table, searching for support. Some members avoided his gaze. Others stared at him with poorly disguised disapproval. He realized there was something else going on, something beyond concern for the corporate image. There was an undercurrent of resentment, of opportunism, of people who had always been waiting for a chance to question him, to challenge him, to try to oust him from the presidency. And now that chance had arrived. One of the board members, Beatrice Fisher, a sharp lawyer known for her conservative stance, spoke up. "Ryan, some of us believe it would be best for you to temporarily step down from the presidency, just until things calm down." Ryan felt his blood boil. "Step down? This is my company. I built this with my own hands." Beatrice was unfazed. "And that's exactly why you should protect it, by stepping aside before the damage is irreparable." The meeting dragged on for 3 hours. Ryan fought, with all his might, to maintain his position. He presented numbers, strategies, rational arguments, but he could tell he was fighting a losing battle. The board had already made a decision before the meeting even started. This was just a formality. In the end, he managed to postpone any drastic decision for 2 weeks, time he would have to present an image recovery plan and prove he was capable of separating his personal and professional life. He left the meeting exhausted, humiliated, furious. He locked himself in his office and, for the first time in years, allowed himself to cry. He cried for the life he had lost. He cried for the new life that was turning into a nightmare. He cried for Julia, for Isabella, for his son, for himself. He cried until he had no tears left. When he returned to Isabella's apartment that night, he found her sitting on the living room floor surrounded by papers, documents from her company, contracts, receipts. "What are you doing?" he asked. Isabella looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Trying to save what's left of my company. But I think it's too late. 3 clients sent me contract termination notices today. 2 more said they'll wait for things to calm down before deciding, but I know what that means." Ryan sat down next to her on the floor, pulled her into a hug. "We'll get through this. I don't know how, but we will." But in the following days, it became clear that getting through it wouldn't be easy. The press remained relentless. New stories came out every day, each exploring a different angle of the scandal. Gossip shows on TV debated the case with relationship experts, psychologists, even priests opining on morality and family. Isabella became synonymous with the other woman, the homewrecker, everything a woman shouldn't be. And Ryan, in turn, was transformed into the man without character, the absent father, the morally corrupt executive. The worst came on a Wednesday night. Ryan was at Isabella's apartment when she screamed from the living room, "Ryan, come see this." He ran in and found her pointing at the television, her face ashen. It was one of the main evening news broadcasts. The anchor, with that serious, concerned expression journalists adopt when they're about to drop a bombshell, announced, "And now an exclusive revelation about the scandal that's shocking news York. According to documents obtained by our investigative team, there are indications that Isabella Martinez, the woman involved in the extramarital affair with businessman Ryan Anderson, may be connected to a network of shell companies used to launder money through social projects." Ryan felt the world spin. Isabella turned white as a sheet. "That's not true. You know that's not true." Her voice was desperate, panicked. Ryan knew. Of course he knew. He knew her integrity, knew that every penny in her company was clean, transparent, documented. But the truth didn't matter. What mattered was the accusation. And an accusation of that caliber, even if false, was enough to completely destroy any chance of recovery. In the following minutes, Isabella's phone exploded. It wasn't hate messages anymore. It was threats, death threats, threats of physical violence, people saying they knew where she lived, that they were going to take justice into their own hands. Ryan immediately called the police. "We need protection. My partner is being threatened." The officer on the other end of the line was polite, but not very encouraging. "We'll file a report, sir, but honestly, without concrete evidence of imminent danger, there's not much we can do." Ryan hung up, helpless. Isabella was having a panic attack, hyperventilating, her hands gripping the couch as if she were about to collapse. He held her, tried to calm her down, murmured words that even he didn't believe. "It's going to be okay. I won't let anything happen to you, I promise." But how could he promise something like that when the entire world seemed to have turned against them? That night, they slept little. Ryan stayed awake, monitoring social media, seeing the increasingly violent comments, the ever more explicit threats. Isabella finally fell asleep from exhaustion, but it was a restless sleep, punctuated by small cries and tremors. Ryan watched her and felt an overwhelming guilt. He had done this, he had chosen to be with her, and now she was paying a price that should never have been charged. When the sun rose the next morning, Ryan made a decision. He had to do something. He had to take control of the situation. He could no longer just passively watch as everything fell apart. He called the best criminal lawyer he knew, hired a private security firm to protect Isabella, and began gathering all of her company's documents to prove the accusations were baseless. But as he planned their defense, he didn't know that the worst was yet to come. Because some wars aren't fought in courtrooms or on the pages of newspapers. Some wars are fought in the shadows, by people you thought you knew but never truly understood. The next day, Ryan found out exactly what that meant. He arrived at the office determined to show he was still in control. He had prepared a detailed presentation for the board, showing that the company's numbers remained solid despite the scandal. He had data, charts, projections. He was going to prove that he was bigger than the rumors, bigger than his personal mistakes, bigger than any moral judgment they tried to pass. But when he entered the boardroom, he could tell from the atmosphere that something was wrong, very wrong. The board members were all there, but there were also 3 new faces. Lawyers, judging by their impeccable suits and serious expressions. Gerald Thompson stood up as soon as Ryan entered. "Ryan, thank you for coming. Please have a seat. We need to discuss a delicate matter." The tone was too formal, too cold. Ryan sat, down slowly, the presentation forgotten in his hands. Beatrice Fisher took the floor. "Ryan, we received an anonymous tip last night. According to this tip, funds from Anderson Holdings are allegedly being diverted to cover personal expenses for you and your, how should I put it, companion. Specifically, there's mention of payments made through shell companies for non-existent projects." Ryan felt his blood boil. "That's a lie. That's absurd. I have never diverted a single cent from this company. My personal life is financed with my own money, which I earn legitimately as CEO." Beatrice continued, relentless. "We understand your position. That's why these lawyers here will be conducting an internal audit, just to make sure everything is in order." Ryan looked around the room. Some board members avoided his gaze. Others watched him with a mixture of curiosity and poorly disguised satisfaction. And it was in that moment that he understood. This had nothing to do with an audit. This was a coup, a carefully orchestrated coup by people within the board itself, people who had always wanted his position, his power, his company, and they were using his personal scandal as an excuse to get him out of the way. "Who was it?" Ryan asked, his voice low but filled with rage. "Who made the tip?" Gerald sighed. "That's confidential, Ryan. You know that." Ryan stood up abruptly. "I know exactly what's happening here. You're taking advantage of a moment of weakness to try to take me down. But it's not going to work. This is my company, and I will prove these accusations are false." Beatrice responded coldly. "Then you have no objection to the audit, correct?" Ryan clenched his fists. "Do the audit. Go through every document, every receipt, every transaction. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find." He left the meeting knowing he had fallen into a trap, a perfect trap at that. Even if the audit found nothing wrong, the mere fact of being under investigation would further destroy his credibility. The shareholders would panic, clients would pull away, the press would have more ammunition. It was a slow-motion checkmate. He called Isabella from the car, his voice trembling with contained fury. "They're trying to take me down. The board. They fabricated a tip about embezzlement and are using it to justify an audit." Isabella was silent for a few seconds. "Ryan, what if they plant evidence? What if they manipulate documents?" The paranoia in her voice was justified, but Ryan tried to calm her. "They can't. I have copies of everything. I know every transaction this company has made in the last 10 years. But even as he said it, a doubt began to grow. What if he didn't know everything? What if there was something he hadn't seen, hadn't noticed, hadn't controlled? The following days were a downward spiral of paranoia and pressure. The audit began. Auditors arrived at the office with boxes of documents, set up in a conference room, and began to comb through every detail of Anderson Holdings' finances. Ryan tried to work normally, but it was impossible. Every glance from his employees seemed accusatory. Every whispered conversation in the hallways seemed to be about him. Every meeting felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. Isabella, for her part, was completely isolated. Her company had lost all its clients. Her bank account was being investigated by the district attorney's office because of the money laundering accusation. She spent her days locked in the apartment, afraid to go out and be recognized, be insulted, be attacked. The threats kept coming. Someone threw a rock through the apartment window with a note that said, "Whore deserves to die." Ryan hired security guards, but he knew that physical security couldn't protect against the emotional and professional destruction she was suffering. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the audit began, that Ryan received the news he had been dreading. Beatrice Fisher called him personally. "Ryan, We need to schedule an emergency meeting. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. It's urgent. Her tone left no doubt. They had found something, or they thought they had. Or worse, they had fabricated something. Ryan didn't sleep that night. He stayed awake, mentally reviewing every transaction, every decision, every document that could be used against him. Isabella lay beside him, also awake, both trapped in their own private nightmares. Around 4 in the morning, she finally spoke. "Ryan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He turned to her. "Anything." Isabella took a deep breath. "Do you regret it? Choosing to be with me? Destroying your marriage, your image, maybe your company for me?" Ryan was silent for a long moment. It was an impossible question. How could he answer honestly without hurting her, without hurting himself, without admitting truths he wasn't even sure of himself? Finally, he said the only thing he could. "I don't know if the choices I made were right, but they were the choices I needed to make at that moment, and they weren't because of you. They were because I was unhappy, suffocated, living a life that wasn't mine. You were just the catalyst. The reason was inside me long before I met you." Isabella turned her face away, and Ryan realized she was crying. "That doesn't make me feel better, Ryan. It just makes me feel like I was an instrument, that I was used for your personal liberation, and now I'm paying an absurd price for it." Ryan pulled her into a hug, but she resisted. He insisted, and finally she gave in, burying her face in his chest. "I didn't want it to be like this. I never imagined it would be like this. I thought we could be happy, just be happy, but everything turned into a nightmare, and I don't know if it's worth it anymore." Ryan held her face, forced her to look at him. "It is worth it. We'll get through this. I don't know how, but we will. I promise we will." Isabella shook her head. "You can't promise that. No one can." The meeting the next morning confirmed Ryan's worst fears. The auditors had found irregularities. They weren't direct embezzlements, but rather a series of payments made to consulting firms and third-party companies that, according to them, had indirect ties to Isabella. 3 companies, specifically. Companies that had provided legitimate services to Anderson Holdings, but had also worked with Isabella's consulting firm on previous projects. The auditors argued that this constituted a conflict of interest, and that the payments could have been inflated to indirectly benefit Isabella. Ryan tried to explain. "These companies were hired long before I met Isabella. The services provided were legitimate, properly documented, and approved by the finance department. The fact that they worked with her firm in the past is a mere coincidence." Beatrice was not convinced. "Coincidence is a dangerous word in an audit, Ryan, and the board has decided that to protect the company, you must temporarily step down from the presidency while a more in-depth investigation is conducted." Ryan felt the floor give way beneath him. "You can't do this. I'm the president. I'm the largest shareholder." Gerald intervened, his voice heavy. "Ryan, you're the largest individual shareholder, but the board, collectively, has decision-making power over executive management, and we have decided unanimously that it's best for you to step down. It's temporary, just until things are cleared up." Ryan looked around the table. Unanimous. All of them. Even those he considered allies. They had voted against him. They had chosen the company over personal loyalty. Or maybe they had just chosen the opportunity to finally get rid of him. He left the company that afternoon knowing he probably wouldn't be back. At least not as president. Maybe never again. The company he had built, to which he had dedicated 15 years of his life, which was his identity, his purpose, his reason for being, had turned against him. And the worst part was he understood why. Because he had made the mistake of mixing his personal and professional life. Because he had allowed his moral judgment to be questioned. Because he had given ammunition to his internal enemies. When he arrived at Isabella's apartment, she was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by boxes. "I'm moving out." Her voice was flat, emotionless. Ryan stopped at the door, confused. "Moving where?" Isabella finally looked up. "I don't know yet. Anywhere but here. Away from New York. Away from you." Ryan felt his heart stop. What are you saying? Isabella stood up slowly. Ryan, look at us. Look at what we've become. You lost your company. I lost my career. We're being attacked from all sides. And for what? To be together? To be happy? We're not happy. We're destroyed. Ryan tried to approach her, but she took a step back. Isabella, don't do this. We'll get through this. I told you, we'll fight. We'll sue whoever spread lies. We'll clear our names. We'll rebuild our lives. Together. Isabella shook her head, tears finally falling. You don't understand, Ryan. I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being insulted. I'm tired of being threatened. I'm tired of being the villain in a story I don't even understand myself. I loved you. I still do. But love isn't enough when the whole world is against you. Ryan felt his throat tighten. You're going to leave me now when I need you. The most. When we finally have a chance to be together without hiding. Isabella gave a sad smile. Without hiding. Ryan, we're hiding more than ever. Hiding in this apartment, afraid to go out. Hiding from the press, from the threats, from the judgment. This isn't a life, it's a prison, and I can't take it anymore. She picked up a travel bag that was near the door. I'm going to stay at my cousin's place in Princeton for a while. I need to think. I need to breathe. I need to decide if I still want all of this. Ryan stood there, unable to move as she walked out the door. He heard the elevator descend. He heard the heavy silence that filled the empty apartment. And for the first time since it all began, since that day in the Japanese restaurant when he first saw Isabella, Ryan wondered if it had been worth it. If all the pain, all the destruction, all the loss had been worth a few months of feeling alive. And the answer, in that lonely moment in an apartment that wasn't his, was terrifying. He didn't know. He simply didn't know. The days following, Isabella's departure were the darkest of Ryan's life. He stayed in her apartment, surrounded by her things, breathing in her scent that still lingered on the pillows, looking at the empty spaces where there had once been boxes of documents, and now there was only absence. He had nowhere to go. The house he had shared with Julia was no longer his. The office at Anderson Holdings was now under the command of an interim president, one of the board members who had always smiled at him in meetings but who, Ryan now realized, had always been waiting for the chance to take his place. Ryan was suspended, sidelined, awaiting the outcome of an investigation he knew would be manipulated to justify his permanent removal. His phone vibrated constantly, but Ryan stopped answering. It was journalists wanting statements, lawyers wanting fees, former friends who now called more out of morbid curiosity than solidarity. He put everything on silent and spent his days lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how his life had disintegrated so completely in a matter of weeks. The only person Ryan kept in contact with was his son. He went to Julia's house 3 times a week, at times arranged by lawyers, and spent 2 hours with the baby. Julia would leave them alone, go out to do something, and return exactly 2 hours later. They didn't talk beyond what was strictly necessary. She would inform him about doctor's appointments, vaccinations, sleep schedules. He would thank her and leave. There was no room for anything more. But those 2 hours with his son were the only time Ryan felt remotely human. Holding that small, warm body, listening to the incomprehensible sounds, smelling the scent of milk and baby powder, Ryan could forget, for a few minutes, that he had become a social pariah. Isabella sent no word. Ryan tried calling a few times in the first few days, but she didn't answer. He sent texts that went unanswered. He thought about going to Princeton to find her, but he knew she had asked for space and he needed to respect that. So he waited. He waited and tortured himself with thoughts about what she might be thinking, feeling, deciding. Did she love him enough to come back? Had she realized their love wasn't worth the price they were paying? Was she going to leave for good, disappear from his life like a mirage that should never have materialized? In the 3rd week after Isabella's departure, Ryan received an unexpected visitor. It was a Thursday afternoon. Ryan was in the apartment, having not showered in 2 days, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants, his beard grown out and unkempt. When the doorbell rang, he almost didn't answer. But something made him get up from the couch and walk to the door. He opened it without asking who it was and was shocked to see who was on the other side. Julia. She was there at the door of Isabella's apartment, holding the baby. a diaper bag slung over her shoulder, her expression tired but determined. Ryan was paralyzed. "Julia, what are you doing here?" Julia looked him up and down, assessing the deplorable state he was in. "Can I come in?" Ryan stepped aside, still stunned. She entered, looked around the apartment, placed the baby in his carrier, and finally turned to him. "We need to talk, not as ex-husband and ex-wife, but as parents, and as two people who once cared about each other, even if that seems impossible now." Ryan led her to the living room. He offered water, coffee, anything. Julia accepted a glass of water and sat on the couch, keeping a safe distance from him. Ryan sat in the armchair opposite her, his hands trembling slightly. The silence stretched for a few seconds before she finally spoke. "Ryan, I came here because I got a call from your lawyer. He told me you were suspended from the company, that you're under investigation, that you're in a difficult financial situation. And looking at you now, I see the situation is worse than I imagined." Ryan looked down, ashamed. Julia continued, "I didn't come here to judge you. God knows you've been judged enough. I came because despite everything, despite the hurt, despite the betrayal, I still care about you. Not in the way I used to, but I care as the mother of your son, as someone who spent 8 years by your side. And I can't just watch you destroy yourself like this." Ryan looked up, incredulous. "Why do you care? After everything I did to you, why do you care?" Julia took a deep breath. "Because if you completely destroy yourself, the one who will suffer is our son. He needs a father, and he needs a father who is at least minimally functional. Look at you, Ryan, you're drowning." Her words were like a slap in the face. Ryan felt his eyes sting, but he didn't let the tears fall. "I don't know what to do. I've lost everything. The company, my reputation, Isabella, I don't know who I am anymore." Julia stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city below. "You're Ryan Anderson, a man who made serious mistakes, who hurt people, who made selfish decisions. But you're also an intelligent, competent man capable of rebuilding. The question is, do you want to rebuild? Or do you want to sit here feeling sorry for yourself until there's nothing left?" Ryan remained silent, processing her words. After a while, he asked, "What do you think I should do?" Julia turned to him. "First, take a shower, get dressed, act like a human being again. Second, fight for your rights. If the accusation against you is false, fight. Hire the best lawyers, rebut every point. Don't let them destroy you without a fight. And third, decide what you really want. Do you want Isabella back? Then go after her. Do you want to rebuild your company? Then start working on it. But whatever you choose, stop playing the victim, because victimhood won't get you anywhere." Ryan watched Julia, the woman he had hurt so deeply, standing there in front of him offering advice, offering a way out of the hole he was in, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something other than despair. He felt a glimmer of purpose. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Julia returned to the couch, picked up the baby. "Because I chose to be a better person than the anger I feel. I chose not to let our son grow up seeing his father completely destroyed. I chose to forgive, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. And you're preventing that peace by sinking like this." She placed the baby back in his carrier and stood up to leave. Before she left, she turned one last time. "Ryan, one last thing. Isabella. She didn't abandon you. She just needed space to process everything. But if you really love her, if she's really worth all the destruction you caused, then you need to go after her. You need to show her that you don't give up, because now more than ever she needs to know she's not alone in this madness." Ryan nodded, unable to speak. Julia left, and Ryan stood there in the middle of the room, her words echoing in his head. That night, for the first time in weeks, Ryan took a long shower, shaved, and put on clean clothes. He opened his laptop and started researching. He looked for the best lawyers specializing in corporate law and reputation management. He made a list of all the documents he would need to gather to prove his innocence. He put together a strategy. If they were going to try to destroy him, he would fight back. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be fast. But he would fight. And then, when the clock struck midnight, Ryan picked up his phone and called Isabella. She didn't answer the first 3 times, but on the 4th, finally, he heard her voice. "Hello?" Her voice was tired, hoarse, as if she had been crying recently. Ryan took a deep breath. "Isabella, it's me. I need to talk to you." Silence. On the other end, then she replied, "Ryan, I told you I needed time. I know and I respect that. But I also need you to know that I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up on you, I'm not giving up on us, and I'm not giving up on proving that we can get through this." Another silence, and then, surprisingly, Isabella said, "I'll be back tomorrow." Ryan felt his heart race. "Really? You're coming back?" Isabella sighed. "Ryan, I've spent these 3 weeks in Princeton thinking about everything. About us, about what happened, about the price we're paying. And I realized something. I can run away from New York, I can run from the press, the threats, the public judgment, but I can't run from myself. And the truth is, I love you. I love you in a way I've never loved anyone. And if I run away now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. So yes, I'm coming back, but on one condition," Ryan answered immediately. "Any condition," Isabella continued. "We stop hiding. We stop acting like we're guilty of some horrible crime. Yes, we fell in love in a complicated situation. Yes, people got hurt. But we didn't kill anyone, we didn't steal from anyone, we didn't commit any crime. And I'm not going to live in shame for what I feel anymore. If we're going to be together, we're going to own it publicly, with dignity, and whoever wants to judge us can judge us." Ryan felt a wave of respect and admiration for this woman. She was right. They had been hiding for too long, had let themselves be defined by the narrative others created about them. It was time to take control of their own story. "I agree, 100%. We'll face this together with our heads held high." Isabella let out a long sigh. "Then I'll see you tomorrow, Ryan, and we'll start rebuilding. For real, this time." Isabella returned to New York on a rainy Friday. Ryan waited for her at the apartment, nervous, anxious, afraid she might change her mind at the last minute. But when she walked through the door, wet from the rain, her heavy travel bag on her shoulder, her gaze determined, Ryan knew she was there to stay. They held each other for a long time without words, just feeling each other's presence, the solidity, the certainty that they were not alone. They spent the weekend planning. Ryan showed her all the documentation he had gathered, all the lawyers he had contacted, the entire legal strategy he was building. Isabella, in turn, had her own strategy. She wanted to make a public statement. She wanted to tell her side of the story. She wanted to look into the cameras and say, in her own words, who she was, what had happened, and why she didn't regret her choices. Ryan hesitated. "Are you sure? The press will crucify you even more." Isabella shook her head. "They won't, because for the first time I'll be controlling the narrative. It won't be sensationalist articles based on gossip. It will be me, speaking directly without filters." The following Monday, Isabella called a press conference. The news spread quickly. The mistress of businessman Ryan Anderson is going to face the music. The journalists were in a frenzy. Cameras from all the major TV networks, newspaper reporters, photographers, bloggers. Everyone wanted to be there to see what this woman who had been so demonized would have to say in her defense. The press conference was scheduled for 3 p.m. on a Tuesday in a small auditorium rented in downtown New York. Isabella arrived 15 minutes early, accompanied by Ryan and a lawyer. She wore a simple black suit, her hair down, with discreet makeup. No ostentation, no provocation, just dignity. Ryan stayed backstage. This was her moment. He couldn't and shouldn't interfere. When Isabella walked onto the stage and sat behind the press table, a murmur went through the crowded audience. Dozens of cameras were pointed at her. Recorders were extended. Curious, skeptical, some clearly hostile eyes. Isabella took a deep breath, looked at the crowd of journalists and began to speak. "Good afternoon. My name is Isabella Martinez. Many of you know me only as the mistress, the homewrecker, the villain of a story that has only been told from one side. Today I'm here to tell my side, not to justify myself, not to ask for forgiveness for something I don't consider a crime, but to humanize a situation that has been turned into a caricature by public opinion. Her voice was firm, clear, without hesitation. I fell in love with Ryan Anderson. Yes, he was married. Yes, his wife was pregnant. These are undeniable truths, and I won't try to minimize or deny them. But it's also true that when we met, his marriage had been dead for years. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. They lived together, but they weren't together. And I didn't arrive with the intention of destroying anything. I fell in love. It's as simple and as complicated as that. A journalist tried to interrupt with a question, but Isabella raised her hand. Please, let me finish. You'll have time for questions later. She continued, I've been called a slut, a whore, a destroyer. I've received death threats. I've lost my company, my reputation, my safety, all because I fell in love, and yes, people were hurt. Julia, Ryan's ex-wife, was deeply hurt. Their son was born in the midst of this turmoil. That is regrettable. But I am not a monster. I am a woman who made difficult choices, who faced devastating consequences, and who is now here to say, enough. Enough of being defined by a narrative that is not mine. Enough of passively accepting the hatred that has been directed at me. Enough of living in shame for what I feel. The room was completely silent. All eyes were fixed on her. Isabella cleared her throat and continued, her voice now filled with emotion. In recent weeks, there have been accusations that I was involved in money laundering, in fraudulent schemes. I have brought documents, certificates, contracts here, all available for your review. Every cent in my company is clean, transparent, audited. The accusations are false, and whoever spread these lies will be sued. But more than defending my professional reputation, I came here to defend my humanity, because what happened to me happens to thousands of women every day. We are judged, condemned, destroyed by a society that insists on putting us in boxes, the saintly wife, the demonic mistress, as if we were characters in a soap opera, not real people with complex feelings, complicated stories, and the right to make choices, even if those choices don't please everyone. She paused, took a sip of water, and concluded, I will not apologize for loving. I will not apologize for choosing to be happy. But I will ask something of you, of society, of everyone watching. Stop turning love stories into public lynchings. Stop thinking you have the right to judge and condemn people for choices that don't affect your lives. And most importantly, stop destroying women just because they dared to go off script. I am Isabella Martinez. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But I am human. And I deserve dignity. Thank you. The silence that followed was broken by a single clap, then another, and another. In a few seconds, part of the audience was applauding. Not everyone. Many journalists remained skeptical. Many still looked at her with contempt. But some, those who perhaps understood that life isn't black and white, who perhaps had their own complicated stories, applauded. And that in that moment was enough. The questions that followed were aggressive, some even cruel. How do you justify getting involved with a married man? Don't you feel guilty for the ex-wife's suffering? Don't you think you should have waited? Isabella answered them all calmly, honestly, without letting herself be provoked. Some answers were evasive because they had to be. Others were painfully sincere. But at no point did she apologize for loving Ryan, and at no point did she allow herself to be humiliated. The press conference lasted an hour and 20 minutes. When it finally ended, Isabella left, through a side door, avoiding the chaos at the main exit. Ryan was waiting for her in the car, his heart racing. As soon as she got in, he asked, "How are you?" Isabella leaned her head back on the seat, closed her eyes. Exhausted, but relieved. I finally spoke. They finally heard my side. Now we wait and see if it changes anything. Ryan held her hand. It did. I'm sure it did. You were incredible in there. But in the hours that followed, it wasn't clear if the press conference had helped or worsened the situation. Social media exploded with divided opinions. On one side, people praised Isabella's courage, saying that someone had finally humanized the story, that it was time to stop judging other people's relationships. On the other side, people were even more furious, saying she was trying to play the victim, that no justification was valid for destroying a family. Hashtags emerged, some defending Isabella, others calling for a boycott of anything associated with her and Ryan. The main news portals published articles about the press conference, some with relatively balanced headlines. Isabella Martinez defends herself against accusations and calls for an end to public judgment. Others with sensationalist titles. Unrepentant mistress says she doesn't regret destroying marriage. The narrative was still being contested, but at least now there were two sides to the story, not just one. In the following days, something unexpected began to happen. Women started contacting Isabella through social media, private messages, emails, some even physical letters sent to her lawyer's office, women who had been through similar situations, women who had been judged for complicated romantic choices, women who had been called mistresses, homewreckers, gold diggers, women who identified with Isabella's pain, with her courage, with her refusal to be, defined solely by the worst moment of her life. Isabella read every message, some with tears in her eyes. A woman from Denver told how she had fallen in love with a separated but not yet officially divorced man, and how his ex-wife had turned the entire town against her. Another woman from Austin said she had been the cheated-on wife in a similar situation, and that despite the pain, she understood that love was complicated and that no one was an absolute villain or hero. There were even messages from men who had been the unfaithful husbands and who, years later, still carried the guilt, but also the gratitude for having found true love, even in the hardest way. Isabella showed some of the messages to Ryan. "See? We're not alone. So many people are going through this. So many people are suffering in silence because they're afraid of being judged." Ryan read the messages, touched by people's vulnerability. And then an idea came to him. A bold idea, maybe even crazy, but it seemed to make sense. "Isabella, what if we used this visibility to do something good?" Isabella looked at him curious. "What do you mean?" Ryan continued. "We were publicly destroyed because of our romantic choices, but clearly we're not the only ones. What if we created an organization, a space, to support people who face social judgment because of complex relationships, therapy, legal guidance, support groups, something that turns all this pain into purpose?" Isabella was silent for a moment, processing the idea, and then she smiled. A genuine smile, the first in weeks. "Ryan, that's brilliant. That's exactly the kind of thing that could give meaning to all of this, turning our tragedy into something that helps other people." Ryan felt a wave of hope. "Then let's do it. Let's start planning. And we can call it the Fresh Start Institute, because that's what it's about, right? Allowing people to start over, without forever carrying the weight of judgment." In the following days, as Isabella began to sketch out the first plans for the Institute, Ryan focused on his own battle. The lawyers he had hired finally presented a robust defense against the embezzlement accusations. Documents were reviewed, witnesses were called, and every suspicious transaction was explained in detail. It became clear that there was no crime, only an attempt by some board members to manipulate information to justify Ryan's removal. The turning point came on a Friday afternoon, when Anderson Holdings' own legal department issued an opinion confirming that there were no irregularities in Ryan's conduct. The accusations were unfounded. Moreover, the internal investigation revealed that 2 board members had fabricated evidence and manipulated documents. They were immediately suspended, and a criminal investigation was opened against them. Gerald Thompson, Ryan's father's old friend, called him personally. "Ryan, I owe you an apology. We were manipulated. We believed lies because we were blinded by public pressure, by the scandal. You have every right to return to the presidency if you want." Ryan was silent for a few seconds. When he finally spoke, his answer surprised even himself. "Gerald, I appreciate that. But I don't think I'll be coming back. At least not now. I need to rebuild my life in other ways. I need to focus on things that really matter. The company will continue to exist, it will remain strong, but I need to find a new purpose." Gerald was surprised. "Are you sure about that?" Ryan looked at Isabella, who was sitting next to him, listening to the conversation. "Yes, I'm sure." It was liberating to say that. Liberating to acknowledge that the company, as important as it had been, did not define who he was. He could be more. He could be better. He could use the resources he had to build something new, something with meaning beyond financial profit. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, something even more surprising was happening. Julia had given an interview to one of the country's top television programs, an exclusive interview, her first public appearance since the scandal. Ryan and Isabella watched together, tense, not knowing what to expect. The host, known for her direct but respectful style, asked the inevitable question, "Julia, what did you feel when you discovered the betrayal?" Julia, elegant in a light blue dress, the baby sleeping in her arms, answered with a serenity that surprised everyone. "I felt pain, a lot of pain. I felt like my world had collapsed, but I also felt over time that I needed to move on. Not for Ryan, not for Isabella, but for myself, and especially for my son." The host continued, "Do you feel anger towards her? Towards Isabella?" Julia thought for a moment before answering. "I did, a lot, but anger is like poison. You drink it hoping the other person will die, but you're the one who dies. So I chose to forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. And my son deserves to grow up without carrying the weight of the hatred I could feel." The camera focused on the host's face, visibly moved. "And what would you say to Ryan now?" Julia looked directly at the camera. "Ryan, I hope you're happy. I truly do. I hope you'll be a better father to our son than you were a husband to me, and I hope that if you chose to be with Isabella, she is worth all the pain that was caused. Because our son will grow up knowing his father destroyed a family for love. And that love needs to be real, it needs to be deep, it needs to be worth it. Otherwise, all of this was just a tragic waste." Ryan felt tears stream down his face. Isabella held his hand, also crying. Julia's interview changed everything. Suddenly, the narrative was no longer about villains and victims. It was about real people with real pain trying to find a path to healing. Public opinion began to shift. Not completely, not universally, but enough. Columnists started writing more balanced articles. Television shows debated the complexity of human relationships instead of simply condemning. Some sponsors who had pulled away from Anderson Holdings began to re-engage, saying that things had calmed down and they were willing to reconsider. Investors who had fled Isabella's consulting firm started to reappear, interested in projects, in partnerships, in giving her a second chance. It wasn't a complete transformation. There was still hatred, there was still judgment, there were still people who considered them immoral, selfish, guilty. But now there were also people who saw them as human. Imperfect, yes, flawed, certainly, but human, and that made all the difference. A month after Isabella's press conference and Julia's interview, Ryan and Isabella were in the temporary office they had rented to start structuring the Fresh Start Institute. It was a small space, very different from the luxurious offices they were used to, but it was theirs. It was a conscious choice. It was a true fresh start. Isabella was on the phone talking to a lawyer who had offered to work pro bono for the Institute. Ryan was reviewing the organization's bylaws, marking points that needed adjustment. In the corner of the room, there was a pile of letters and emails from people asking for help, offering support, sharing their own stories of judgment and overcoming. When Isabella hung up the phone, she turned to Ryan. "You know, I was thinking, 6 months ago we were different people. You were a successful businessman in an unhappy marriage. I was an ambitious consultant focused only on my career. And look at us now, we lost almost everything. But at the same time, we gained something we didn't have before." Ryan looked up from the papers. "What's that?" Isabella smiled. "Purpose, real purpose. Not just working to make money or gain status, but working to make a difference, to help people, to turn pain into something useful." Ryan stood up, walked over to her and hugged her. "You're right, and you know what else? I wouldn't change a thing. All the suffering, all the loss, all the judgment. Because it brought me here, to you, to this moment." Isabella buried her face in his chest. I wouldn't change it either. Even knowing everything that was coming, I would choose you again, always. They stood like that for a few minutes, holding each other in the middle of that small, unpretentious office, surrounded by papers and plans for the future. Outside, New York was still New York, chaotic, noisy, relentless. But inside, in that moment, there was peace. There was certainty. There was a love that had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger. Ryan's phone vibrated. A text from Julia. "Can you come by tomorrow at 3? The baby misses his dad." Ryan smiled as he read it. He replied quickly, "I'll be there, thanks." And then he put his phone away and turned his attention back to Isabella, to their work, to the life they were building together. An imperfect life, yes, but an honest one. A real one. Theirs. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan Anderson slept peacefully that night. The next morning brought a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, fear-laden silence that had dominated the past few weeks. It was a silence of anticipation, as if the entire city were holding its breath before something important happened. Ethan woke up early, his body still tired, but his mind surprisingly clear. Beside him, Chloe slept peacefully for the first time in days, her face relaxed, her hair spread across the pillow. He watched her for a few moments, feeling a wave of gratitude mixed with a weight he still carried in his chest. She had fought for him, for them, when all seemed lost. She had faced the world, while he hid behind cancelled meetings and strategic hospital stays. He got up carefully so as not to wake her and walked to the window. Down below, New York was already beginning to stir. Cars, people, life moving, on its relentless course. And somewhere in that urban vastness was Leah, alone with the son he barely knew. Mason, his son, a boy of only 3 months who was growing up without his father's presence, surrounded only by his mother's love and the silent judgment of a world that had chosen sides without knowing the whole truth. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He had managed to save his company, regain the trust of the shareholders, clear Chloe's name. But what had he done for Leah? What had he done for his son? The answer was clear and painful. Almost nothing. He sent child support, of course, much more than necessary. But money was easy. Money didn't require him to look into Leah's eyes and see the hurt, the disappointment, the betrayal he himself had planted there. Chloe stirred in bed, slowly waking up. When her eyes met his, she smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice still hoarse with sleep. Ethan returned the smile, but she immediately noticed something was bothering him. She knew that look, that posture. He was thinking about Leah. He always thought about Leah when he was quiet like that. "You need to see her," Chloe said, sitting up in bed and pulling her knees to her chest. Ethan turned to her, surprised. Chloe continued, her voice firm but gentle. "You need to see your son, Ethan, not out of obligation, not because it's the right thing to do, but because you'll spend the rest of your life wondering who he is, what he likes, if he has your smile or your mannerisms. And it will hurt. It will hurt more than any scandal, any headline, any lost meeting." Ethan took a deep breath. She was right. He knew she was. But the fear was greater than reason. Fear of facing Leah, of seeing the pain he caused embodied in flesh and blood. Fear of not knowing what to say, of not knowing how to be a father to a child born in the middle of a war he himself had created. "What if she doesn't let me see him?" he asked, his voice low. Chloe got out of bed and walked over to him, placing her hands on his face. "Then you insist. You try again, and again, until she sees that you've really changed." "But, Ethan, listen to me. You can't build a future with me while carrying the weight of a past you've never faced. Leah and Mason are part of your life. They always will be. And I accept that. But you need to accept it, too." Chloe's words echoed in Ethan's mind all day. He tried to focus on work, on the meetings that needed to happen, on the contracts that needed to be signed. But none of it seemed important. As evening fell, when the sun began to paint the sky orange, he picked up his phone and typed a message. To Leah. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted it. Finally, he decided there were no right words for this. Not in a text. He grabbed his car keys and left the office without telling anyone. Leah's address was etched in his memory, though he had never been there. It was an apartment in Soho, not far from his office, but in a quieter, tree-lined neighborhood, away from the spotlight that still followed his every move. He parked in front of the building and just sat there, in the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his heart pounding. What was he doing? Leah hadn't responded to any of his previous attempts to contact her. Why would now be any different? But before he could change his mind, he saw the building door open and Leah walk out, pushing a stroller. She looked different, thinner, her face tired, but there was a strength in her that hadn't been there before, a determination that comes from surviving the worst and deciding to move on. Ethan got out of the car before he could overthink it. "Leah," he called out, his voice louder than he intended. She stopped immediately, her body tensing. She turned, slowly, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Ethan," she said, and there was so much weight in that name that he felt like he'd been punched. "What are you doing here?" He walked toward her, his hands in his pockets, trying to seem less intimidating, less desperate than he felt. "I needed to see you. I needed to see Mason." Leah looked at him for a long moment, as if assessing whether he even deserved a response. Finally, she sighed. "You can't just show up here, Ethan. It doesn't work like that. You can't disappear. For months, leave me alone with everything, with the judgments, with the sleepless nights, and think you can come back whenever you want." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I have no right. I know I failed you and him. But Leah, I want to change that. I want to be present. I want to know my son." Leah laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of joy. It was a bitter, tired laugh. "You want to be present?" she repeated. "Ethan, have you ever thought about what that means? It's not just showing up when it's convenient. It's not taking a picture, posting it on social media and pretending to be Father of the Year. It's waking up in the middle of the night when he cries. It's changing diapers. It's being sick with worry when he has a fever. It's being here, every day, not just when your conscience bothers you." He swallowed hard. "I understand. And I want that. I want all of it." Leah shook her head. "No, Ethan. You don't understand. You have no idea what it's like to raise a child alone while the whole world judges you, points at you, calls you a victim, while your new girlfriend gives interviews saying how happy you'll be. Do you think it's easy? Do you think I don't cry every night wondering where I went wrong, what I could have done differently?" Her voice broke at the end, and Ethan saw tears forming in her eyes. He felt an immense urge to hug her, to beg for forgiveness on his knees, to promise that everything would be okay. But he knew words weren't enough, not this time. Leah quickly wiped her tears, composing herself. "Look, I'm not going to stop you from seeing Mason. He's your son. You have a right. But don't come here thinking you can make up for months of absence with an apology. If you want to be in his life, you're going to have to prove it. Not to me, to him." Ethan nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Leah looked at the stroller, where Mason was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to everything. "You can see him," she said, stepping aside a little. Ethan approached slowly, as if he were in the presence of something too fragile, too precious. And there he was, Mason, his son, small, perfect, with the serene face of someone who doesn't yet know the world's complications. Ethan felt tears stream down his face uncontrollably. It was his son, his own flesh and blood, and he had missed the first months of his life because of cowardice, selfishness, fear of facing the consequences of his own choices. "He's beautiful," Ethan whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Leah watched the scene in silence, her arms crossed, her expression still closed off, but a little less harsh. "He has your eyes," she said, almost against her will. Ethan looked at her, surprised. "And he's going to know who you are," Leah continued. "But Ethan, if you come into his life now, you can't leave. You can't disappear when things get tough, because if you do that, I won't forgive you, and neither will he." "I promise," Ethan said. And this time there was conviction in his voice. "I promise I'll be here, no matter what." Leah nodded slowly. "We'll see," she said, taking the stroller again. "You can visit him, but take it slow, no rushing. He needs to get used to you, and I need time too." Ethan agreed, knowing he had no right to ask for more. They arranged a time for the following week. As Leah walked away, Ethan stood there, watching her disappear around the corner with the stroller. He felt both relieved and devastated. He had taken the first step, but the road ahead was long, and he knew he would deserve every stone, every obstacle, every look of distrust. When he got home, Chloe was waiting for him. She didn't ask anything, just hugged him. And in that hug, Ethan felt that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. For him, for Chloe, for Leah, for Mason, for all of them. The following months were a slow and painful reconstruction. Ethan started visiting Mason regularly, always under Leah's watchful eye. At first the boy was wary, crying when he was held, but gradually he got used to it. Ethan learned to change diapers, prepare bottles, and sing off-key lullabies that made Mason laugh. And with every laugh, every gesture, every small step forward, Ethan felt he was regaining something he had lost. Not his relationship with Leah. That was too broken to be fixed. But his relationship with himself. The feeling that maybe he wasn't just the villain of his own story. Chloe, for her part, kept a respectful distance. She didn't try to meet Mason, didn't ask to accompany Ethan on his visits. She knew that was a sacred space, an attempt at healing that couldn't accommodate anyone else. And Ethan loved her even more for it, for understanding without him needing to explain, for giving him the time and space he needed to become the man he should have always been. The company continued to recover. The scandals were gradually forgotten, replaced by other headlines, other dramas, other public tragedies. Ethan was respected again, not as the perfect businessman he never was, but as someone who had made serious mistakes and was trying to fix them, and that, in a way, was more valuable. A year after the scandal, Ethan and Chloe got married. It was a small, discreet ceremony, with only close friends and family. No press, no spotlight, no pomp. Just two people who had been through hell together and consciously chose to build a future side by side. Leah wasn't invited, obviously, but Ethan thought of her during the ceremony. He thought about how different everything could have been if he had been honest from the start. If he had had the courage to admit his unhappiness before destroying everything around him. But there was no going back. There was only now. And now was Chloe, smiling at him with tear-filled eyes, saying, "I do." Mason grew up. From his first steps to his first words, Ethan was there. Not always, not as much as Leah, but enough for the boy to know he had a father. An imperfect father, full of flaws, but one who was trying. And maybe that was enough. Chloe, fulfilling the promise she had made to herself, founded an organization for women who had been publicly judged for their romantic choices. The institution grew quickly, attracting stories from all over the country. Women who had been called mistresses, homewreckers, gold diggers. Women who had been condemned without a trial, without the right to a defense. Chloe gave them a safe space, a place where they could tell their stories without fear. And in doing so, she found peace herself. Ethan, for his part, stayed in business, but changed the way he worked. He started delegating more, trusting his team, not letting work consume his entire life. Because he had learned, the hard way, that success without balance is just a gilded cage, and he had been caged for too long. On a Saturday afternoon, almost 2 years after the scandal, Ethan went to pick up Mason to spend the day with him. The boy, now almost 3, ran to him as soon as he opened the door, shouting, "Daddy!" with the innocent joy of children. Ethan picked him up, feeling his heart ache with emotion. Leah watched the scene from the doorway, her arms crossed, but there was a small smile on her face. "You've changed," she said, almost as if surprised, at herself for admitting it. Ethan looked at her. "I had to change," he replied, "or I would have lost everything that really matters." Leah nodded. "I know things between us will never be the same. I haven't completely forgiven you, and maybe I never will. But I recognize the effort. And Mason loves you. That's what matters now." Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't total forgiveness. It wasn't complete redemption. But it was a start. And sometimes, a start is all you can ask for. That night, after dropping Mason off with Leah and returning home, Ethan found Chloe on the balcony, looking at the city lights. He sat next to her, taking her hand. They sat there in silence for a few minutes, just enjoying each other's company. "Do you think we're going to be okay?" Chloe asked, her voice soft. Ethan thought for a moment. "I think we already are okay," he replied. "It's not perfect. It never will be. But it's real. And it's ours." Chloe smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yeah," she said. "It's ours." And there, under the starry New York sky, two survivors of a storm that nearly destroyed them finally found a piece of peace. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending. It was better, it was real, and it was enough. In the years that followed, Ethan kept his promise. He was present in Mason's life, followed his growth, his achievements, his difficulties. Not as the perfect father he would never be, but as a man who learned, through pain and regret, the value of being present. Leah, for her part, rebuilt her life. She met someone, a kind and patient man, who loved her without demands, without drama, without scandals. And for the first time, in a long time, she allowed herself to be happy. Chloe continued her work at the organization, touching lives, changing stories, proving that second chances exist for those who have the courage to seek them. Ethan supported her in everything, not just financially, but emotionally, physically. Because he had learned that love isn't just passion, it's a choice. It's being there on the hard days, in the boring moments, on the dull mornings and silent nights. It's choosing every day to stay. When Mason turned 5, he had a birthday party. Ethan was there, as was Chloe. Leah was there, with her new partner. And everyone, in some strange and imperfect way, coexisted, not as friends, not as one big, happy family, but as adults who had gone through a collective trauma and chose, for the love of a child, to set hatred aside. Mason blew out his candles with shining eyes, surrounded by everyone who loved him. And in that moment, Ethan realized he had lost a lot. But he had also gained something precious, the chance to be better, and he was determined not to waste it. Life went on, not without scars, not without painful memories, not without nights when the past came back to haunt them. But it went on, because that's what life does, it goes on, and people, if they're lucky and brave, go on with it. Ethan never forgot the day he asked Leah for a divorce. He never forgot her look, the pain, the disappointment. He carried it like a brand, a constant reminder that actions have consequences and that some wounds never fully heal. But he also learned that it's possible to live with those wounds. It's possible to build something beautiful even on ruins. It's possible to love again even after destroying. And when many years later Mason grew up and became a young adult, he asked his father about what had happened, about the scandal, about the divorce, about everything. Ethan didn't lie. He told the truth, the ugly, painful, unfiltered truth. And in the end, he told his son, "I made terrible mistakes. I hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. But I learned, and I've spent the rest of my life trying to be better, not to erase the past. That's impossible, but to honor the present and build a future I can be proud of." Mason listened in silence, and when his father finished, he just said, "I know you're not perfect, Dad, nobody is, but I know you love me, and that you tried. That's what matters." And maybe it was. Maybe in the end, all anyone can do is try. Try to be better. Try to fix what's broken. Try to love, even when the world says you don't deserve it. Ethan held Chloe's hand, looked at the son he almost lost, thought of the woman he hurt but who, somehow, had moved on. And he realized that life isn't about happy endings. It's about second chances and third ones, and as many as it takes until we get it right. And even when we don't get it completely right, it's about trying, always trying. Because in the end, courage isn't about never falling. It's about getting up every time you fall, and keep walking, even when it hurts, even when it seems impossible. Because life, with all its imperfections, its pains, and its joys, is worth living. And love, with all its risks, its fears, and its uncertainties, is worth feeling. And so under the sky of a New York that never sleeps, Ethan, Chloe, Leah, and Mason continued their lives. Not perfectly, not without pain, but with hope. And sometimes, hope is all we need to move forward. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ethan, Chloe, Leah, and Mason has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of mistakes, regrets, and redemption, please leave a like now, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment struck you the most. Was it Chloe's courage, Leah's pain, Ethan's transformation, or Mason's innocent love? Every day we bring intense stories like this, revealing the most complex and true side of the human soul, where no one is entirely a hero or a villain, just human. We'll see you in the next episode with another narrative that will stir your emotions. Until then.